Hopefully the final update here for the Tamiya Madcap project. So I managed to actually source a replacement spur gear here. This is a 70-tooth spur gear. If you're going to run a sport-tuned motor or a torque-tuned motor, I think there's two options for the Madcap in the Astute. There's a 72 spur gear and I think a 78 or something thereabouts. You're better off with the 70, so you can fit a large enough pinion gear in here without the motor mount screw going all the way out to the end, and you can get reasonable speed with it. So managed to find one. The 3D printed ones are in the mail, so I will have those as backups, but thankfully I do have an original part here. Anyway, key point is this weird looking pinion gear. So this is what I talked about earlier with the Charisma slipper clutch setup, and this actually fits very nicely here. So how does this work? First off, you have the pinion itself, okay, is this guy, and this is a Charisma pinion gear. It has a 5mm inner bore, and it's completely flat on both sides, okay? And that mounts onto this shaft here. So this black piece that has the grub screw that mounts onto the motor output shaft, that has a smaller diameter 5mm shaft going out to about this far, and then a threaded shaft going out to about this far. And this pinion gear is completely flat on both sides, and it slides right in. And on either side, so between this black mount piece and the pinion, you see that blue piece right there? That's a slipper pad. Then there's another slipper pad on this side, and then there's a small steel plate, and then a spring, and then a nut. So that allows this pinion gear to slip on this mount, okay? And you can adjust the tension here to adjust your slippage. Granted, it's a very small area, total area for the slipper pads, so I certainly wouldn't recommend doing something like this with a modified motor. It would just destroy the pads. But with a silver can motor, you could probably make it last a couple of runs, hopefully. So this is what I intend to use in order to preserve the drivetrain here, because without this in place, I would otherwise have a normal pinion gear, which is locked to the motor. This does not have a slipper clutch. And then there's no ball diff in here, right? I replaced that with a gear diff. So the last resort would have been the ball diff, that if you make it a little bit loose, that could slip a little bit under excessive torque loads. But if you make the ball diff too loose, the car's just going to slip, and it's not really going to drive. And there's a very fine tuning window there to allow the ball diff to act as a slipper clutch while also giving you effective power coupling to the wheels. So you're better off setting up the diff to actually work as a diff correctly, and not to serve a second role as a slipper clutch, and then to use this guy. Now, this whole assembly, again, made by Charisma, the pinion gear is sold separately from the slipper shaft assembly. The slipper shaft assembly is for the GT10 RS. You can still find that online at various suppliers. The pinion gears are harder to find. This is a 24-tooth pinion gear, which is approximately the right gearing I would want for this chassis. And thankfully, the Charisma pinion gears use the Tamiya type gear pitch. It's not a 48 pitch pinion. But if you want different gears, or if you have a really hard time sourcing this gear, as I certainly did, then you have to fabricate your own pinion for this. So what you would do is, first you need a pinion gear that has the Tamiya pitch, which probably means just getting a normal Tamiya pinion gear, or maybe something like this. And then what you would end up having to do is first bore out this hole to 5mm and make sure it's perfectly symmetric so it doesn't wobble, okay? And then after you're done with that, you'd have to shave off this part here, this mount piece here, this, I don't know what you would call it, but this part where it mounts, so that you're just left with the gear. And you have a flat face on this side and a flat face on this side. Now this here is kind of open, so you're losing area. You could try to fill this in with maybe some epoxy or something and then sand it down. Or you could just try to find a metal gear that's perfectly flat on both sides, so it acts a bit more like this, and you can just take those gears and modify them to fit this to have whatever gearing you like. So that could work too. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to highlight this. This is not my idea, by the way. I picked this up from somebody else writing on a forum about how they modified their top force to accept this type of slipper arrangement on the other side of this gearbox. So basically, what they did is they cut open a hole where the motor mounts right there to allow this thing to push through, because this whole unit is longer than a normal pinion, right? The pinion would stop here, this keeps going. So I kind of had to do the same thing as that guy did with his top force. I had to drill a hole here and ream it out to make it large enough so that when this mounts onto the motor plate, right, this nut here can protrude out of the hole. And by the way, this hole, even though this is pretty well centered the way I drilled it, the placement of this is not perfectly centered to the hole, because where this is going to sit really depends on the size of the pinion. If I change the size of the pinion gear, this screw is going to, loosen, and I'm going to have to move this motor in or out. So you want to leave yourself enough margin with the size of this hole if you want to experiment with different gear sizes, so you can afford enough movement here for different gearing and not have it run into the plastic here on either of these edges. So yeah, that's it. Electronics are installed. I know it looks a little messy. It's my classical wiring here. Part of the reason this looks messy is because of this LiPo cutoff switch. It kind of complicates the wiring a bit. If anything, I might change the servo so I could have something a little torqueier so this returns to center better. But otherwise, I'd say this is about done. Maybe paint the body, although this white body's not too bad. I do have a clear body that I would like to paint with my normal paint scheme. Whether or not I would actually run this at the Vintage Off-Road Nationals is an entirely separate question, even though I put all this time and effort and money into this thing. The Vonats is changing the track they're going to race at. It's no longer at RC Excitement in Massachusetts. It's going to be at Adrenaline RC in Virginia. Completely different track, different surface. If I do get to go, it is a much further drive for me, so I don't know if I can go yet. But if I get to go, I want to bring something that's a bit more known to me, maybe my VQS or my Dirt Thrasher for the classic class. But this would be a contender in the event that I do eventually run two-wheel drive in the classic class, and assuming that these modifications are still legal. I don't know yet. So yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.